This lecture, or this video, is on chapter 1.4. We're going to look at three more advanced ways to sample other than a simple random sample, which is probably what we're most familiar with. These methods are called stratified, systematic, and cluster samples. And so we have your note sheets for 1.4. So the first thing is, what is a stratified sample? So here's an example. President of the university wants to conduct a survey to determine the community's opinion regarding campus safety. The president divides the community into three groups. Residents, so think of this keyword stratified. You want to break it into three groups, into kind of three categories. Residents, non-residents, students, and staff, including faculty. So he can obtain a stratified sample. Suppose there are 6,000 residents, 13,000 non-residents, and 2,000 staff for 21,000 individuals. What percent of the community is made up of each group? That's an easy question to answer. Just go ahead and then 2401 divided by 21,000, 13,000, and so forth. So let's go ahead and do that calculation. So there's the calculations for the percent of each stratum. We're breaking it into groups, stratum. Now the president wants to obtain a sample size of 100 with the number of individuals selected from each stratum weighted by the population size. How many individuals should be selected from each stratum? So now let's go ahead and think about how do we actually obtain a stratum. So what we have here now is here's the process to obtain a stratified sample. Separate the population to non-overlapping groups, which we have here, three groups. Those are called strata. And then obtaining a simple random sample from each. So in this case, out of the 100, we can get this right here, out of the 100, approximately we want 28 residents. We would want 61 non-residents. I'm just taking the percent of 100 here. These are approximations. And then 11 staff. That's how many we'd want. And then we would then pick 28 out of the 6,000, 61 out of the 13,000, and 11 out of the 2,400 using a simple random process. That would be a stratified sample. And so that's what we would be looking at. A second technique is called systematic sample. How would we do that? Systematic is actually a lot easier. Let's go through that. Stratified there. Systematic sample is obtained by selecting every kth individual from the population. The first individual selected is a random number between 1 and k. And so in this case here, if you have 1,000 people, I'm going to choose every 10th person, the first, the 10th, the 10th, the 20th, the 30th, the 40th. And so you just select some process there to do that. And so what is a systematic sample? Again, it's obtained by selecting every kth individual from the population. The first individual selected is a random number between 1 and k. There are 5 steps we use to do that. And again, it comes from our PowerPoint or from our book or from our notes. Here are the 5 steps here. Seems more complex than what it is. If possible, approximate the population size, determine the sample size you want, and then divide that by the sample size, and then this becomes your k, and then select a number between 1 and k, call this number p, and then you just alternate. We'll look at a sample of that there. But those are the 5 steps that we want to write. So now looking at the 5 steps here we outlined, let's go ahead and try to at least do a simple example. And so you have this example here. And then looking at the situation here, I think what's missing on the example, we want 250 bottles. Oh, the sample, obtain a sample from 250 bottles. And so in this case, let's go ahead and do this example here. Design a sampling technique to obtain a sample of 25 bottles. What we need to know is the population is 250, and then again I got that from, I think it's missing on my notes here, but I got that right here, a sample from 250 bottles there. And so in this case here, what we do, we want 25 bottles, so in order to looking at our steps here, we have our big N is 250, our sample size is 25. We're going to go ahead and calculate what we call P. How do we calculate P? Sorry, we're going to calculate, we want not P, but we want K. K is going to be a value 250 divided by 25, so you get 10. So K is 10, and then P is going to be a random number from 1 to 10. And then you go ahead, pick a random number. Let's say let's say your random number is from 1 to 10. Let's pick it. Let's say it's 5. So then that means we're going to go ahead and then so randomly select a number between 1 and K. Call this P. So your round number equals is around from 1 to 10. Let's say P is 5. I just picked it out of the blue. And then everything else is now going to be, you'll start at 5. Your K is 10. So you go to 15. You'll pick the 25th, the 35th, and so on. That's how you would pick the bottles. So that's a systematic process. That leaves us with the last method, which is called the cluster sample. Cluster is very similar to stratified. It gets mixed up. A cluster is obtained by selecting all individuals within a randomly selected collection or group of individuals. And so this one is a little bit different than stratified, but sounds very similar. So again, a cluster sample here is obtained through selecting all individuals within a randomly selected collection or group of individuals. For example, a sociologist wants to gather data regarding household income within the city of Boston. Obtain a sample using cluster sampling. I have some space here. I'll put it here on our notes here. So let's think of Boston and how clusters can be different than stratified. Let's pretend that this is Boston. Okay, that's Boston. And think of a city. Cities are broken up many times into districts. And so let's say Boston is broken into districts, something like that. Let's say Boston's broken into 8 districts. And so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then to obtain a cluster is that since now we've broken this up into 8 groups, we would randomly choose a certain amount of groups. Let's say we want to choose, so you would randomly choose two districts. Okay, and let's say with those districts, let's say you choose them and you get district 3 and 8. And then what you do is you survey everybody in 3 and 8. So 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7 don't get surveyed. We select everyone from here. So in a cluster, you break it into groups, but then you choose some groups and you select everyone, versus stratified. It's a little bit different. And so that kind of leads us into kind of looking at the different methods we've studied so far. We have simple random sampling, stratified sampling, so you have populations, and then you pick individuals from that simple. Stratified, you break into groups, right? And then you choose some from each of the groups. Systematic, you kind of line the data up, and then you systematically choose in some numerical fashion. And then cluster, you break it into groups, but you choose everyone from a certain amount of the group. So this picture is important to get down or look at, and make sure you reference that in the book. But there's, again, difference. You got to really read that and take a look at the difference between there. And so that leaves us with the last definition. Convenience sample is one in which individuals in the sample are easily obtained. You just start picking anybody, and that's how we finish this here. Define convenience sampling. And then that's what we had there. And then the last thing is what we call multi-stage sampling, is when you use a combination of these techniques, and that's what we have there. And so to finish up this section on sampling, we left with convenience sample, the definition here, and then this idea of multi-stage sampling, which is basically the idea that you use a combination of the techniques to do your sampling. And so that's chapter 1.4.